guys, Olive here today to talk to you about the books that I read, or in one case, DNF'd in July of 2019. Per usual, I'll start off by discussing all those books I have not previously mentioned elsewhere, then I'll tell you about that DNF, followed by a discussion of the one book that does have its own video here on this channel. So let's start off with my absolute failure of a 5-star nonfiction prediction. That was The Personality Brokers by Merve Emre. This is a history of the creation of the world's most famous personality test, the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, or MBTI. I've spoken many times about the Myers-Briggs here on my channel. I find the test fascinating, probably not entirely accurate, but interesting nonetheless, and this book definitely calls into question the validity of the test. It was created by a mother-daughter pair in the 1920s, and they based it off of the teachings of psychologist Carl Jung. Now in our present day, the test is wildly successful. It's used by everyone from corporations to the government, and because they're really raking in the dough, they are very cautious about their image. They really don't want anyone to know really anything about the very shaky foundations of the test. That is very much the setup of this book, and it leads you to believe that there's this juicy tale at the core just waiting to be uncovered. And then it goes on to tell one of the most boring, plodding stories I have ever read in nonfiction about an overbearing, neurotic mother unhealthily obsessed with Jung and her overachieving daughter. It is about their relationship first and the test second. It does draw attention to the less than totally credible basis for the test, but it doesn't do enough to point out specifics for the reader. It's almost as though she lost focus on what this book was actually supposed to be. I think she got really stoked that she was able to tell the story of this mother and daughter pair since it was kept so under wraps, but she forgot to make it exciting for the reader. It wasn't fun, it wasn't challenging enough, and I'm already forgetting it, which says something. I had much better luck with the majority of the other books I took on this month. One of those was The Feather Thief by Kirk Wallace Johnson. I had been wanting to pick this book up since everyone was raving about it during last year's Nonfiction November, and I'm so glad I finally got to it. This is a mix of history, natural history, and true crime. It tells the story of a young American student who broke into the British Museum of Natural History in order to steal, of all things, bird feathers. It turns out that he wanted to use these feathers and also sell them for use for a very specific hobby that enthusiasts get more than a little obsessed with perfecting, the Victorian art of salmon fly tying. It originated in the Victorian era, where people misguidedly believed that the feathers of exotic birds, colorful feathers, were more effective in catching fish when fly fishing. In more modern times, it's done entirely for show. The lures don't actually hit the water. But that doesn't mean that hobbyists aren't still obsessed with getting the rarest feathers and absolutely perfecting their art. And that's what motivated young Edwin Riss to break a museum window and stuff a suitcase full of rare bird carcasses. And what resulted from this was an even crazier story that our author first heard about when he himself was fly fishing and was told about this incident by his fly fishing instructor. Much like John Carreyrou's Bad Blood, Johnson was directly involved in this story. He did massive amounts of research and investigation, and he even interviewed key people in the story. But I really liked how he handled his role in the story much more than I liked how John Carreyrou did. He basically comes out and says, almost immediately, hey, I'm a big part of all of this because I was downright obsessed with this story. He just lays it all out there. He is not even attempting to appear objective because that would just be impossible. The book has a lot more character because of that choice. I found it extremely well written and engaging. You wouldn't think something like this would be a page turner, but it entirely is. It is totally worth the hype. I really enjoyed reading it. Then I moved on to another work of nonfiction, food writer Ruth Reichel's newest memoir called Save Me the Plums. In this book, she tells us about her years of experience being the editor of Gourmet magazine before it shut down in 2009. She talks about how she first got the job. She talks about her transition from being a food critic for the New York Times to the magazine world. She talks a lot about some of the great work that they were able to do while she was the editor. And then sadly, she documents the publication's end in 2009. There is so much to love in here. This is actually the first Ruth Reichel book that I've ever picked up. She does have several other memoirs that probably would have been a much better place for me to start. But after reading this, I am downright hungry to pick up more of her work. Another new release that I just couldn't help picking up this month was called The Body Lies by Joe Baker. This one caught my eye not just because of the premise, which is an assault survivor decides to leave the city to become a creative writing professor for a master's program, when one student starts to become obsessed with her, but also because Joe Baker is also the author of Longbourn, which is a Pride and Prejudice retelling told from the perspective of the servants, which I absolutely loved. It was one of my favorites of 2017. I think it's pretty clear immediately that this book is much different than Longbourn. I definitely did not go into it expecting more of the same, although if she wants to write another retelling, I will certainly take it. I picked this book up because the writing in Longbourn was absolutely fantastic. She clearly has skill. And this book confirmed that. I'll say that this book is a literary thriller, but I'm really reticent to give you any more details because so much of the experience of this book is in those details. I'll tell you that it's less of a heart-pounding thriller and much more of a descent into helplessness as more and more things start to pile on top of our main character. Per usual, I was irritated by several different Goodreads reviews that I read for this book that ridiculed the main character for her lack of backbone. That's a huge part of this story. She is her own person, but she's also a very potent symbol about the way we as women are expected to accept more and more responsibilities and garbage from the world, all with a smile on our face. Accepting that for so long doesn't even earn us respect or push us forward in life. It just primes us for more abuse and exploitation. That is what this book is about. And once you understand that, it is deeply unsettling. The book does have some heart-pounding scenes, but its real strength is in the way it makes tangible some of these broken power dynamics within society. And it shows how predators can exploit existing systems to serve themselves. This book is brilliant. Then I also read a memoir, well, memoir/biography, that so many people have spoken highly about here on BookTube. That book is called The Trauma Cleaner by Sarah Krasnostein. This is the biography of an Australian woman who owns what's called a trauma cleaning business. She and her team will go in after a violent crime, a death, maybe even a hoarding situation and clean up, since this is not something the police or any other public service actually does. But as you may have heard other reviewers note, this book is much less about the trauma cleaning business than it is about this woman, Sandra. This is mainly the very incredible story of her life. She is a trans woman, and obviously that was not an easy transition to make in Australia in the 1980s. In fact, very little about her life has been easy, and this book discusses all the different things she's had to use to overcome obstacles in her life. Sometimes that means using her body through sex work, but most frequently she has relied on her strength of character and innate charm to make her way through tough situations. Sandra is an incredible person, and our author just adores her, and we know this because she says so over and over again. However, she doesn't shy away from being critical of Sandra when past mistakes or current mistakes come up, which I really appreciated. She also makes it clear that Sandra's memory isn't the best, so she does a lot of her own research trying to piece together this story. I really enjoyed this book. Like others, I was mildly disappointed that we didn't get more about the trauma cleaning business in general. But learning about her backstory, learning about her past trauma, it really made it clear that that was necessary to allow her to be capable of doing this hard work. I've really gotten into memoir over the past couple of years, and it struck me earlier this year when I was reading Hammerhead, The Making of a Carpenter, one of the best nonfiction books I've read so far this year, that we are probably missing out on so many interesting stories because that person isn't interested in or isn't able to write a beautifully crafted memoir about it. Most of the memoirs that I really love are by people with an interesting story, but also with a writing background, which not everyone is going to have. So how many great stories are we missing out on? For that reason, I am so grateful to Sarah Krasnostein for being so dedicated to telling Sandra's story in this beautiful, authentic way, because otherwise, we may not have been able to hear this story. This book is great. I highly recommend it. Next, I finished the random book off of my TBR that my patrons kindly chose for me. That book was Salt to the Sea by Ruta Sepetys. I don't want to talk about this book for too long because my opinion is definitely not in line with the general consensus about this book. First of all, this is a World War II novel, so already on kind of shaky ground when it comes to me. But in this book, we follow a cast of characters who are trying to make their way out of Eastern Prussia as the Russian army approaches. challenges. Some of them are just trying to make their way to safety, others want to go back to their home countries, and one in particular has a mission that he is trying to accomplish. I can't really say any more about the plot because that's basically the whole thing, besides the fact that this is based off of a real historical event and there's tragedy involved. And that last point is important because this book is about tragedy and nothing else. Pretty much everything in this book is shallow. The entire purpose of this book is to make you feel emotions. We're told how much these characters have gone through. We see them deal with loss. The puppet strings that are thrown out attempting to latch on to the reader's emotions and tug were quite visible. I thought the writing was pretty sloppy. The characters would use the same lines and would echo each other's emotions in a very heavy-handed way. I was just really not impressed by this book, and actually since I finished, I've become more dissatisfied with it. This is always how I end up feeling about books that try to emotionally manipulate and do very little else. Every single time I'm reading one of these books, I'm sitting there thinking, I see what you're trying to do here, but little do you know, I'm part robot, and I need more than surface level feels to get me invested in a book. Better luck next time. I also ended up being kind of let down by the book I buddy read with two wonderful ladies, Sarah at Hardcover Hearts and Jacqueline at 6 Minutes for Me. The three of us read Chintu by Jennifer Nansubuga Mukumbi. This is a multi-generational Ugandan novel that tells the story of the cursed Chintu clan beginning in 1750. The opening section where we get to see where this curse originated was absolutely fantastic. I was so invested in the story, so absorbed by it. But then we start to follow the different descendants of these original characters generation by generation, seeing how this curse is inflicting hardships in one fashion or another. As it goes on, it loses a lot of the magic of the opening as more and more characters are being introduced. It gets really confusing with such a large cast. By the end of it, it's entirely impossible to know who's who, much in the style of a Russian novel, since some of these characters go by multiple names. The three of us reading this together concluded that a family tree somewhere in this book would have been so helpful in keeping everyone straight. I know Homegoing by Yaja C had one like that. I was constantly consulting it and it helped me so much. It's so frustrating because throughout this book there are moments of brilliance. Her prose can be so evocative and powerful. But in the end, it just didn't hit the mark for me. And then the last book I'll talk about at length is called Out East by John Glynn. This is his memoir about one summer sharing a house with friends and some acquaintances in Montauk, aka the Hamptons. I know on the surface it seems like a really fluffy book. Some of you may even be questioning why on earth you'd want to read a memoir about a bunch of rich kids vacationing. But I found it to be a really refreshing break from some of the really heavy memoirs that I've read over the years. And that's not to say that there isn't depth to this book, because there absolutely is. This was a very pivotal summer in Glenn's life. He was dealing with grief, with burgeoning love, and also a journey to self-acceptance. We also get portraits of all the situations that his housemates were going through at the time. While they're all there to party, they're only there on the weekends. And life does exist outside of the house, or as they call it, the hive. It's a really well-written book, plain and simple. It has some great lines from the sentimental to the humorous. There is one that I think I will always remember when he compares a group of guys who were in Montauk for the very first time, bounding around like a litter of golden retriever puppies. Then on the other hand, there's so much feeling behind the way he describes coping with the loss of his beloved grandmother. I just went through that last year, so that particularly resonated. He doesn't overcomplicate things, and he makes you feel like you're really there in the Hamptons with this group of friends. He has proven that yes, nonfiction works can be beach reads too. My one DNF for the month was unfortunately Child of a Hidden Sea by A.M. Delamonica. I really wanted to love this nautical fantasy tale with a nerdy female main character. It sounds perfect for me. But everything about this book clashed. It was not well paced, the tone shifts were intense, and it never really felt like it knew what it wanted to be. I would start to get frustrated within 2 minutes of starting a new chapter, so I decided to just put it down. And the one book that I have discussed at length elsewhere that I will only briefly talk about here is the new fantasy novel from Silvia Moreno Garcia called Gods of Jade and Shadow. This is set in southern Mexico in the 1920s and follows a young woman named Cassiopeia, who accidentally releases the true true god of the underworld from his prison and goes on a journey with him to reclaim his throne. Moreno Garcia really excels at writing a fun summer romp, and this book is no exception. I thought it was so entertaining and the prose is bursting with color. I not only did a full video review of this, but I also wrote about it for Open Letters Review. I'll put links to both of those things down in the description box below if you're interested in hearing more about this. So those were all of the books of July 2019. As always, I would love to hear from you if you've read any of these books, if you've heard about them, or if you're now interested in reading them after hearing me talk about them. You can put that or any other general comments or questions you may have down in the comment section below. But if you'd prefer to chat with me somewhere other than YouTube, I am on a variety of different places on social media, and the links to all of those profiles will be in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.